meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Let's talk about viruses for a moment. Biologists, the folks who study life forms, have a tough time with viruses. They fit most but not all of the requirements to be called a life form. Some of the biologists promote the viral cause by suggesting a change in the requirements for declaring something to be alive. Most others choose to refer to them as almost life. Made of the same components of life forms, but not actually living things themselves. And the history of vintage cars also has a few machines that, like viruses being not quite life, are not quite cars. The mid-19th century, especially the 1860s, saw some interesting vehicles pull themselves upon the roads. Not coaches, not cars, they were the missing link, the almost cars. These vehicles are sometimes called cars, but this depends on how a car is defined. If you define it as a road-going vehicle designed from the ground up to be a personal vehicle, can be operated by a single person by themselves, and can be operated without leaving the vehicle, then none of the following would be a car. One or more of these points is not quite met. Very few actual vehicles from this era survive today. Most of what remains are drawings, eyewitness accounts, and sometimes photographs. So let's take a brief look at some of these beauties. Elijah Ware was a native of New Jersey that, in 1861, founded the Ware Steam Wagon Company. Over a period of 6 years, he manufactured several of his vehicles, the Ware Steam Wagon. His wagon sported a central boiler, twin-cylinder steam engine, and chain drive to the wheels through a gear reduction from the engine. He sold a few of them, including one to a Catholic priest in the British colony that would become Canada. This would make the Ware the first road vehicle manufactured in the USA ever to be exported. In 1863, a Mr. Sylvester Roper also built a steam carriage of sorts in Boston, Massachusetts. It came really close to being a car. However, to keep the boiler fired, either someone would have to ride on the back to stoke the fire, or the driver would have to stop every few minutes to do it himself. Despite this, it attracted some attention at the time, and it still exists today in a private collection. An American hydraulic jack maker named Richard Dudgeon built his steam wagon in 1866. Looking more like a train than anything else, it required a driver and a stoker to operate, but it was a fast machine, able to carry 8 or so passengers at speeds up to 30 miles an hour. The vehicle still exists and can be found at the National Museum of American History. Over in England, Mr. H.P. Holt decided on a 3-wheeled machine, 2 in the rear and 1 in front, which he built in 1866. He also installed 2 twin-cylinder engines, one to drive each wheel through a sprocket and chain drive. Note that there is no relation to H.P. Holt and Benjamin Holt, the inventor of the continuous track tractor. Canada chimed in with the efforts of Henry Taylor, a jeweler from Quebec that converted a high-wheeler buggy into a steam carriage in 1867. Although not the most reliable vehicle, it was the first to be built in Canada and can be seen at the National Museum of Science and Technology in Ottawa. Lovers of classical music would probably know the name of the Frenchman Maurice Ravel. But what many folks don't know is that his father, Pierre-Joseph Ravel, was quite an inventor and built a steam wagon in 1868. It sported a single-cylinder steam engine and an oil-fired boiler of his own design. It was a 3-wheeler and not easy to steer. In fact, in late 1869, it went out of control and overturned, killing one person and wounding several others. It was put into storage after that and was destroyed during the Franco-Prussian War. And let's conclude this list with the work of Etienne Lenoir. This Belgian was one of the greatest inventors ever, with a list of important patents that includes, but is not limited to, the internal combustion engine. He had the idea of making an engine that worked like a steam engine but didn't need a boiler. He would accomplish this by exploding a volatile fuel inside the engine cylinder. It is true that the internal combustion engine had been designed and built as early as 1807, but no one before him made one that was actually viable. Lenoir's engine was a one-stroke engine. Yes, one stroke. There was a firing chamber on each side of the stroke. Fuel was not compressed by the piston. Rather, the natural burning of the fuel pushed the piston down, and then fuel was added in the opposite cylinder head and the piston was sent back. Not the most efficient way of doing things, but it actually did work. Patented in 1860, this engine was, due to it not needing a heavy boiler, small enough to power a vehicle. He did just that in 1863. A three-wheeled brute, he called it the Hippomobile. The engine provided 1.5 horsepower, which was just enough to get the beast rolling at a little over 3 miles an hour. Driven by a sprocket and chain system, Lenoir drove it on a slow road trip around the suburbs of Paris in 1863. News of this spread, and Alexander II, then Tsar of Russia, bought the car and sent it to Russia. There were many more people across Europe and the USA who built almost cars during this time. Frightening children and horses, spewing smoke and steam. People of the time were divided on what to think of them. Some were quite fascinated with these early vehicles, wanting to know more about them and how they work. Others derided them for the hazards they caused on the roads and their unreliability. Nevertheless, the engineering that went into creating these almost cars eventually led to the actual cars of the 1880s. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.